today for our story time number 59, we have an overall theme of the famous and the ordinary. I suggest that people might want to dress up as someone famous, and we've got lots of attempts at being famous. I thought about who I might dress up as, and about midweek I was thinking, oh, I'd like Jodie Whittaker's Doctor t-shirt with the rainbow stripe, or I'd like a David Bowie Fairy King outfit with the spike line. But of course, there's no way, especially because there are some male strikes over here at the moment, I was going to be getting my spiky blonde wig or my striped t-shirt. So I decided to go for either a lay person or a minor celebrity, perhaps trying to pass themselves off as somebody famous to go along to one of these, red carpet major awards things or something. So I've done a little ID. I don't know if you can.
Yeah. Absolutely, definitely famous with a fame face.
Very, very professional looking. They wouldn't even look at that twice. They'd think it's such professional.
Straight through.
Convincing ID, right?
Yeah, clearly. And
they let you poodle in as well.
Really? Well, our little prop is a target that I got Simon Fairweather to sign. It says to mark Simon Fairweather after he won an Olympic gold medal. So,
Wow.
That's a real famous target. Famous, Sarah. That one's signed by Simon Gerrans and Graham Brown.
All the famous Simons.
Yeah.
Featured here today. Fantastic.
Yeah, but there is this. I want to know if Mark's target goes in the shed under tea. In the compartment.
This one is actually inside this target rolled up. But it is
precious.
It's a brand new target. It hasn't been shot at, that particular one. So and nor will it be. Unless Simon Fairweather, geez, that's a long time ago. That was the 2000 Olympics, by the way. That was 20 years ago.
Wow, that's amazing. It's vintage famous.
My cup of tea is my brush with fame. Because my son was a musician for a long time, and he worked with a singer called Charlotte Church, and Charlotte Church invited me for a cup of tea.
Oh.
So I don't have any pictures, but I do have a memory.
Wonderful.
Very nice.
My links are a little bit tenuous. I was inspired to buy a cat carrier because Taylor Swift, when she's on tour, takes her cats in one similar. These books I got after meeting the author at Adelaide Writers Week.
Oh,
nice. So it's John Flanagan, who I actually hadn't heard of before Adelaide Writers Week, but I like to go to the kids and the young adults tent because generally they're much more interesting and funny than the adult serious books talks. So he was talking about it, and it's like he's a fantasy writer, probably aimed around 11 to 13-year-olds. Yeah. It's like, he's written like 25 books and is like known all around the world. And I was like, I think he maybe started after I was that age. So
there are lots of sunglasses in the islands.
Oh, really? We keep losing them, Sarah, so we're wearing two at a time.
I see. Yeah, it's something that you keep misplacing and you forget that it's on your head. That is one of our other themes, which is things that you've lost that are actually in a really obvious, sensible place.
On the top of your head.
And also, Tegan is very on theme with the tenuous connection of the cat carrying backpack, because that is one of our other themes. When someone gets very fixated on a certain famous person or public figure and is picking out little things they have in common. I think I might have the same jumper or as this one celebrity I'm a big fan of. So let's have the rest of our themes. We had Good Samaritans, people who stop and give you help without expecting anything in return. Soccer or football of the European variety, and unexpected results in it. The concept of at all costs in sport or in other forms of competition. Mini golf, lost keys, when you think you've lost something, but it's actually somewhere really sensible. Chain reaction storage or domino effects. Now, in our little Storytime group, this has 2 already established Storytime dictionary names. First being a Bert and Ernie, which comes from a Sesame Street Bert and Ernie story where they are doing this thing where they've tried to find a place for something and it doesn't fit, so they put it somewhere, but they have to take something else out, and then that has to go somewhere, and it goes on and on and on and on, and they've moved everything in the house. It was also known as one of those puzzles. It's Beth and Emily's term for that, meaning those sort of things where you have to move the pieces into the one space to sort of get things to fit. So that we had that when people fixate on the celebrity and get very excited about minor or tenuous sort of connections with them. When you're suddenly in competition with or playing against your hero, the famous and the ordinary, of course. When you ask someone famous a mundane query, Grease the dog, a well-known character from some previous stories, Betty meeting someone famous, and teamwork on fixing or repairs. And we had a couple of things that have gone on to our wait list. Now, at the end of today, I will look at our wait list because it's got quite long. There are quite a lot of things that have just gradually something hasn't quite fitted, or it's coming a bit later after I've already planned the story. And there's quite a long list there waiting to be included. So what I'm going to propose is that next story I actually do a wait list clear out and I cover all those things that are waiting, and we maybe have a few more additions from the group, but I'll go through what's currently waiting, and we'll see if that inspires you with any more requests. A little poem to start us off today is called The Famous and the Lost. I wonder where it all begins. The path to plain old being, or the path to every other human knowing where you might be seen. Like cards we simply cannot find tucked safely in our pockets. The mysteries of making it are rarely more than moments lost and incidents of luck and love or errors brought to light, turned into famous facts to fill the magazines of aimless minds. And like the keys we've safely kept aside to simply locate, so often faces seen on every screen and page have a curious fate. Recognized without a pause to ponder and yet soon forgotten, the occasional "whatever happened to" quickly glossed over. I think that when the spotlight fades and the flash is turned away, like comfortable mementos on the mantelpiece, perhaps a person would be glad to say, in ordinary dressing gowns, the ghosts of fame have gone from, lucky to be lost and left behind as fast as fleeting notoriety found them. Okay. Our story today is called Ordinary at All Costs. Now, it does contain a character who is a real celebrity, real life. However, obviously, my story is a fictional work, so none of the things that they're going to be doing or saying in here are things that they actually have done or said or are alleged to be doing, or would do or say in the future. And not necessarily any reflection on this person. I'm not actually going to mention the surname of this famous person in the story, so you may work out who they are. I know some of you definitely will. Others may not if you're not really familiar with some of the main things that they feature in, but we'll see how we go. So, ordinary at all costs. Chen held the measuring tape up against the side of the washing machine and heaved an exasperated sigh. Ned, the old rattler simply isn't a standard size. It's too old for convention, just like us. Ned wasn't really paying attention, owing to the fact that their dog, Grease, was currently tied up out the front of the store. Grease had once managed to acquire a stranger's sock whilst tied up at the front of the hardware supplies shop, and Ned didn't really trust him to sit outside without mysteriously obtaining any objects belonging to passers-by. I wish the old rattler would live to wash another day, he sighed. I have such fond memories of that old thing. Remember the time we'd just met Max and we had that horribly awkward dinner, and old rattler saved the day by flooding the laundry? Bailing out that washing water together completely changed the group dynamic. Chen groaned and started measuring the height of the next washing machine in line. It did not save the day, Ned. It made the laundry floor go rotten and we had to replace all the joists. She stood looking at the row of candidate washing machines with her hands on her hips. Perhaps if we put the fridge in the laundry, we can fit the new washing machine in the kitchen. Ned nodded with an air of distraction, which was not unusual for Ned, but which Chen suspected was currently a result of him trying to visualize the layout of the kitchen. I think we'd have to take one of the cupboards out and add some other kind of storage for the pots, he mused. Fine, sighed Chen. We'll go and get some shelving stuff after this, just in case. What about your tea rack? Well, the tea can go on the new shelves. Ned shook his head. Those are supposed to be for the pots that we have to take out of the cupboard. Several hours later, Grease had been tied up out the front of 5 different shops and was chewing on a shoe, the origins of which were unclear. Meanwhile, the tired and hungry Chen and Ned loaded the back of the ute with various brackets, bits of wood, doorknobs, screws, glue, the new washing machine, and a new bin. Unfortunately, the back of the ute already contained some bits of tractor engine, various balls, a bulk bag of dog food, a large crate for safely transporting chickens, and assorted tools. Thus, Chen was in the back of the ute, sitting on the chicken crate and arranging the pre-existing contents into a tower secured with octopus straps, while Ned attempted to quickly insert the new acquisitions into the gaps Chen created. Grease had to sit in the cabin on Ned's lap in the passenger seat. Whilst most people might have suggested the dog sit at Ned's feet, Ned had vast experience in travelling with Grease and felt it best to avoid wasting the energy required to continuously push him back onto the floor. Grease sat happily upright, the shoe he'd found still clenched in his jaws, his tongue lolling out of his mouth around it in a clearly smug expression, and his shaggy black and grey fur completely blocking Ned's view. Let's just go to the pub for lunch, Chen decided. It's a bit late to have to work out what to eat at home. Ned nodded in agreement and bumped his nose on the shoe Grease was holding, leaving a dirty smear on his cheek made up of dog slobber mixed with whatever had been on the shoe's sole.
Oh.
Meanwhile, elsewhere in town, Betty, slowly and cautiously, edged her car out of the driveway. Her neighbour, Barb, looking smartly dressed and a bit nervous, sat in the passenger seat. I dare say it might have been faster for you to get the beastly bus, Barb, Betty complained, as she finally pulled the vehicle onto the street. I'd have got rid of this blasted thing years ago if it wasn't for the fact that I do love being a vampire at those park LARPing festivals. You know how I hate driving. Barb adjusted some pins in her hair, squinting into the small mirror on the back of the passenger side sunshield. I know, Betty dear, but the other people on the bus aren't such good company as you. They don't want to talk about my date. Betty pursed her lips and came to a complete stop at a small and entirely empty roundabout. I don't want to hear about your blooming date either, Barb, but here I am driving you to it. I'm not sure why you agreed to the plodding idea. You don't know the first thing about soccer, and you don't even like the third pub. Last week you called it a fandangled neon monstrosity, and I'm inclined to agree. Although I do hear they make very good chips out of sweet potato, I might get some and review them on Carry the Paper Crane's Instagram. People don't mind suspending disbelief when it comes to Carrie eating things, I find. Barb adjusted her pearls. You know about sports, Betty. Be a dear and tell me how soccer works on the way. Betty made a face where her mouth was a very straight line. She'd noticed that a lot of people couldn't actually make this face, despite often using the emoji for it in their posts. She felt that this gave her a decided advantage in the art of facial expression. Just because I've had a go at roller derby and bull does not mean I can explain such codswallop as the offside rule, Barb. Perhaps you should ask your gentleman friend to tell you the ins and outs of the game. I imagine that would account for quite a lot of your subsequent conversation. A bus pulled out in front of Betty and she honked her horn at them, pulling to a stop by the entry to the service station. Upon arrival at the third pub, Betty selected a parking space and spent a number of minutes going in and out of it in order to line up the car correctly, while Barb reapplied some magenta lipstick. Then Barb got Betty's walker out and they made their way inside, Betty making herself scarce by going immediately to look at the counter meals menu for the aforementioned sweet potato chips. The front of the pub had a chalkboard sign which declared that furry friends were welcome, as long as they were polite. Betty eyed it skeptically, thinking of a cat she knew who would certainly take advantage of this. A couple around Barb's age had a scruffy black, grey and white dog under their table at the front window. The dog appeared to be taking apart a shoe, which Betty was pretty sure did not constitute good manners, but she decided not to make a fuss. Instead, she settled in at the bar, ordered her sweet potato chips and some raspberry lemonade, and turned her attention to the soccer match that was just getting started on the big screen. The players were warming up, wearing what Betty very much hoped were just special warm-up outfits. The Australian players had what she felt were extremely unfortunate patches and shapes on theirs. They looked a bit nervous, Betty thought. This was reasonable from what she understood. A young overseas friend of Betty's often said as a joke that if Australia ever won the World Cup, he would move here on a permanent basis. As she watched, one of the Australian players went over to the other side and requested an autograph from a member of the other team. Betty didn't think this was the right way to start the game, but then it was probably difficult to get those things right when you were competing with your heroes. She munched a sweet potato chip and considered whether there was any context that would constitute her entering a rivalry with one of her heroes. When she'd first met her friend Fraser, Betty recalled being pleased to talk in person with a young person who was successful at generating a large Instagram following, but she didn't really remember experiencing the sense of awe that other people had for well-known public figures of any sort. The way she saw it, they were just people whose job it was to be seen. She certainly couldn't abide the idea of asking anyone to sign anything just to have a copy of their signature. It was just after kickoff in the soccer, and the ball was going nowhere in the middle of the field, thanks to several players who had fallen over, and some others who kept passing it backwards, probably something to do with offside. Betty yawned and got up to go to the bathroom. While she was in there, Betty heard some cheering from the bar and then a lot of excited voices talking loudly. When she emerged, Betty discovered that Australia had somehow scored a goal in her absence.
Wow.
There was also a man sitting in her spot at the bar. Since she'd moved the bar stool from this position to make space to sit on the seat part of her walking frame instead, it was possible that this being her spot was not obvious. However, Betty still had half a bowl of sweet potato chips and most of a raspberry lemonade left waiting for her, and she was most certainly not going to give these up. She elbowed and walker-rammed her way through a bit of a crowd that seemed to have accumulated, probably due to the proximity of this spot to the largest of the screens in the room, Betty thought. "Excuse me, sir, you've sat in my spot," she told the man. "Those are my chips." The man, who had a bald head but a rather appealing face, and had donned a pair of thick black-rimmed glasses to read the menu, turned away from several people who seemed to Betty to be rather getting in his face. Perhaps he'd stolen their spots too. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," he told her in a rather posh English accent with an odd, faint American tinge to it. "In my local, I always sit at this end of the bar, you see. It's just a silly habit." He got down from the bar stool and moved over so that Betty could park her walker back in its prior position. A few people glared at Betty as she manoeuvred into her seat, which she felt was very strange and unwarranted. "Thank you," she told the man, grabbing a chip and turning her attention back to the screen. "Oh, you nincompoop." This was directed at one of the soccer players who was rolling on his back on the ground. "It is dreadful when they spend such a long time feigning injury, isn't it?" the seat-stealing gentleman remarked. "Yes," complained Betty. "It isn't good etiquette to try to get other players in trouble. Just play the game, you ploppers." She put her bag on her lap and rummaged around for Carrie's paper crane. Betty's handbag was famously bottomless, and she extracted some knitting. A large print copy of Empire of the Vampire, which she was reading for LARPing character research, her fanged false teeth, most of a box of tissues, a compact face powder, and 5 pens before she located her purse, in which Carrie the Crane was secreted. "Oh, lovely moss stitch," commented the spot-stealing man, nodding at Betty's knitting. Betty eyed him skeptically. "Do you knit, then?" He inclined his head. "Not much anymore, but I have a little bit in the past." He picked up Betty's neat square of moss stitch and added a couple of stitches to it. Some of the people sitting and standing nearby leaned over to watch him do this, and Betty glared at them all. "I need to count those blasted stitches, thank you." At the table by the window, Ned was holding his black jacket out from his body by the zippers and shaking it emphatically at Chen. "It's the same one, I'm telling you, Chen." Chen rolled her eyes and gave Grease a chip under the table. "It isn't the same, Ned. His is all shiny. It's probably some designer brand he's getting paid to wear in public." She threw a glance up at the bar, where the old lady with the walking frame seemed to now be snatching back her knitting. "Maybe I could go get a selfie," Ned suggested excitedly, pulling out his phone. "You know what? I think we have the same phone. Look." "Ned," sighed Shen, "you're 79. Surely you've grown out of taking selfies, even with famous people." Just then, the old lady, who was sitting on her walking frame at the bar, dropped one of her sweet potato chips, and Grease lunged out from beneath Chen and Ned's table in pursuit. "No, Grease, show some etiquette," Ned exclaimed, grabbing at the dog's collar as his chair threatened to overturn. Grease's lead tangled around its legs. "Oh dear," Chen groaned, getting up. A roar went up from the half of the pub that was still paying attention to the soccer. "I think we should take Grease home, Ned. There's a bit too much excitement in here for him." She took hold of the dog, one hand on his collar and one on a very short section of the leash, and tugged him towards the door, Grease's claws sliding on the polished wood floor as he attempted valiantly to remain in chip-grabbing range. Ned sulkily followed them outside, throwing a resentful glare in the direction of the knitting woman. Inside the pub, Betty was taking everything out of her bag again, Barb now at her shoulder, looking impatient. "I missed that goal as well," Betty was complaining. "Blasted players only stop stalling and do something when I'm not looking." He picked his teeth at the table, Barb announced with a shudder, and he ate prawns and flicked bits of the shell everywhere. All right, all right. You have successfully made clear that your date is a totally soggy one, Betty huffed. Unfortunately, I can't for the life of me locate the car keys. Barb started trying to help look, and the two of them bumped their heads together like slapstick comedians. Ouch! Betty rubbed her eyebrow. Oh, goodness, exclaimed the seat-stealing man. Are you all right? Keys are always going missing, aren't they? I once found mine entangled in a Klingon hairpiece. The key ring was all. He made a twirling motion with his finger to indicate hair twining around the metal. I have no idea how it happened. Betty, who did not know what a Klingon was, much less what manner of hairpiece this might be, just widened her eyes and nodded. Are you based far away? Asked the stranger. I will quite happily drive you. I sense that this football game is going to have an unexpected outcome. Pubs get rather overwhelming when that happens, in my experience. Barb's mood brightened immediately. That's very nice of you, she exclaimed, squishing Betty aside to approach the gentleman. I'm Barb. She stuck out her hand. Seat-stealing man shook hands and replied, Lovely to meet you, Barb. I'm Patrick. I'm Betty, said Betty absent-mindedly, feeling vaguely as though she ought to have introduced herself earlier. But Barb, dear, if we get a lift, my car will be stuck here. Patrick leaned over to address the bartender, who seemed to have been in quite close proximity ever since Betty returned from the bathroom. Excuse me, do you think you could keep an eye out for some lost car keys and give me a call if they're found? He gave the bartender a fancy little card that presumably had his number on it and scribbled something briefly on the back. Of course, sir, thank you, replied the bartender, in what Betty thought was an unnecessarily deferential tone, even for someone working in customer service. All right then, ladies, we can come back for the car if the keys turn up, which of course they will, Patrick told them. In the meantime, shall we escape? Patrick had a very comfortable hire car with a brightly lit GPS screen and the sort of seats that can warm you up from multiple different angles. He could tell that it was a hired vehicle from the little package of forms on the dash. She sat in the front with her handbag placed neatly on her lap. Carrie the paper crane was still in her hand, so she carefully dug out her purse and put Carrie back inside. I would love to know the story of that paper crane, Patrick remarked as he proceeded very smoothly back up the main street. Betty attempted not to look too pleased at someone noticing. Well, that's Carrie. I take pictures of her doing all sorts of things for the gram, she explained. Oh, you're on Instagram then, exclaimed Patrick with a smile. You should tell me what your handle is and I'll follow you. Betty gave him a suspicious look for this. What do you post on Instagram? Oh, replied Patrick. Sometimes I put pictures of dogs, but lately I read things like bits of sonnets and classics and so on and put the videos up. Answered Betty, not especially impressed. I usually let Carrie do all the appearances on mine, except for when my vampire costume is especially good. Then sometimes I practice lines from vampire literature that I think would be good in the live action role playing that I do. People seem to quite like those. Patrick pulled the rental car up in between Betty and Barb's houses. Oh, yes, he said. I noticed that you have some fangs among your possessions. I imagine playing a vampire must be a lot of fun. I've been a space captain rather a lot, but you probably get to do more dramatic bits as a vampire, I think. Yes, said Betty. Some of the youngsters in my group want to do some sci-fi, but I think it would just feel very silly. Whilst this conversation was going on, Chen and Ned were attempting to go home and sort out the puzzle of fitting things into their kitchen and laundry. Life, however, had other ideas. Whilst driving up the quite steep hill that led most of the way to their house, Ned spied, through some strands of Grease's chaotic fur that were parting in the breeze, a teenager whose bicycle had a flat tire. Oh, what a pain to get a flat on this hill, he sighed. Pull over, Chen. I think we have the pump and stuff in the back somewhere. Ned hopped out and shoved things around in the back of the ute for a while, finally coming up with the bike puncture repair equipment. See, Chen, it can be good to have everything but the kitchen sink in the ute. Sometimes it means we can help someone. Don't joke, Ned, Chen replied. We almost did come home with a new kitchen sink, remember? The teen, Alex, removed the bike's wheel. Ned patched the tyre, and all three of them worked to put it back in place, while Grease helped by picking up and carrying around everything they put down. Once Alex's tyre was fit for riding on again, and the bicycle pump had been retrieved from Grease's jaws, Chen and Ned made to set off. Actually, Alex said in an embarrassed tone, I'm supposed to be up by the mini golf course to meet some people in 5 minutes, and I definitely can't ride up this hill that fast. Not to worry, smiled Chen. Let's see if we can get the bike in the back and give you a ride. The bike was added to the piles of things strapped down in the back of the ute, and Alex was squeezed into the cabin between Chen and Ned. Grease sat on Ned and tried to lick Alex all the way up the hill and around the corner to the mini golf course, wearing a mischievous grin on his doggy face. Back outside Betty's, a previously unconsidered problem had come to light. Betty's house keys were on the same keyring as her car keys, and thus were also nowhere to be found. Are you sure they aren't in that special zippy pocket on your bag, Betty? Barb pressed, making Betty take everything out again. They looked in the zippy pocket and inside the lining of the bag. They looked in all the pockets of Betty's vampire coat. They looked in Barb's handbag and in Barb's pockets. But no keys were forthcoming. Tell you what, mused Patrick. The keys are probably going to turn up at the pub when the soccer crowd clears. Why don't we go somewhere else and do something fun while we wait for their call? Like what? Asked Betty, who felt that she'd already done enough socialising for the day. What about mini golf? Patrick suggested. Barb does keep saying how you like trying out all kinds of sporting activities. I hear there's a course just on the outskirts of town. A competitive spark came to light in Betty's chest. All right then, she turned her walking frame back in the direction of Patrick's hire car. Vampires versus space aliens. No, I'm not an alien, Patrick began, but Betty was already in the car. Oh, never mind. At the mini golf course, Betty retrieved her false fangs and carried the paper crane from her handbag and pulled her walking frame out of the car with an air of great determination. Somewhere between her house and the course, she'd decided that she, ancient vampire larper, would be beating this sci-fi gentleman at mini golf at all costs. She fitted her fangs and threw her smart black coat around her before edging her way from the vehicle. Chen and Ned pulled up at the mini golf course and helped Alex get his bike out of the back of the ute. Alex thanked them and walked off in the direction of some other teens who were waiting a short distance up the road. Ned sighed. If we'd gone straight home, I might have had a chance to go back to the pub with my Klingon sword to get signed. Chen gave him a look. Thank goodness for stray teenagers in need of assistance. She frowned and squinted in the direction of the kiosk. Does that look like the old lady from the pub to you? Ned looked. Wait a minute, they're here together, look. He pointed excitedly. Stop pointing, Ned, Chen scolded. Well, I suppose we could play a little bit of mini golf while we're here. She looked around. Where's Grease? Ned glanced back into the ute, where he'd been under the impression Grease was waiting. No canine was present in the vehicle. Oh no. Chen and Ned made their way across the car park, calling Grease's name and looking around them. Eventually, they found themselves at the kiosk, behind the little huddle that included the old lady with the walking frame and one of Ned's all-time TV heroes. Excuse me, began Ned. I know this is a very strange way to introduce ourselves, but have you seen our dog? He's medium-sized, scruffy, sort of generally sooty-coloured in various shades, and usually holding something in his mouth that he would not relinquish at any cost. Patrick turned around and seemed to consider this carefully. Is he the one from the pub? Chen pulled a face. If you mean the one trying to tip our table over in order to reach people's dropped chips, then yes. He's over there, said Betty, pointing to where a group on the third hole had put down their snacks in order to retrieve their golf balls from inside the mouth of the plastic dragon. Grease had picked up a small cardboard box with chicken nuggets in it and was making his way back towards the car park, looking extremely pleased with himself. Oh no! Ned shielded his eyes from embarrassment and ran to catch Grease by the collar. Grease, we have talked before about stealing. He began dragging the dog back to Chen and past Patrick on the way, who was headed towards the third hole with a fresh cardboard container of nuggets. Ned looked between his retreating back and Chen, who was standing with the two old ladies, looking surprised. Did he just replace Grease's stolen goods? Seems like it, replied the lady with the walking frame. Now, are you joining us for golf or are you going? I'm going to win this victory for the vampires, you see. She flashed Ned a grin, and he gave a startled jump at the appearance of fangs. Who are you? He asked her, as Chen retreated a small distance behind him, holding Grease's collar. I'm Betty, smiled the vampire with a walking frame. And this is Barb, she indicated her friend, and that's Patrick. We met him at the pub. Ned looked back and forth between them. Do you know who he is? No need for any stranger danger talk, Barb told him. I'm 80 and Betty here is 87. We can take care of ourselves. No, Ned started. I meant that... Right then, interrupted Patrick brightly, returning. Shall we play some golf? Yes, declared Betty, showing her fangs again, this time in what seemed to be an attempt at intimidation. I'm ready. Watch out, aliens. Ned gave her a very confused look, but widened his eyes imploringly at Chen, who said, I'll take Grease for a walk. Ned can stay and play. He's quite good at mini-golf. I usually lose the balls in bushes and things. She began towing the disgraced dog back to the ute to retrieve his lead. There was nothing left for Ned to do but trail after Betty, Barb, and Patrick onto the course. The first hole involved getting the ball around a series of bubble shapes and into the mouth of a large fish, which had fangs, rather like Betty's. Barb made slow progress, tapping her ball a very short distance with each shot so that everyone was waiting for her. Patrick hit his ball most of the way through in one shot and then laughed as it hit the last bubble and rolled all the way back to him. Ned wasn't really sure what to do on his turn. Did he really want to show all of the others, including Patrick, up? Betty, who clearly had no such concerns, let go of her walking frame and smacked the golf ball with such force that it jumped over all of the bubbles and landed perfectly in the fish's mouth in one go. Ha ha, she shouted, vampire triumphs. She waved her golf club dangerously close to Patrick's nose. Betty, Ned exclaimed, horrified. Don't do that to... Patrick loudly interrupted. Oh, we shall see about that. As they moved towards the second hole, he turned to look back at Ned and shook his head, putting a finger to his lips. Ned just shrugged wide-eyed and followed. Things continued in much the same vein until the fifth and final hole. Ned and Patrick were neck and neck in second, Betty, of course, streaking ahead, and Barb not seeming to care awfully much about coming last, so long as she got to tell them all about how terrible her lunch date had been. Ned lined up his shot, still wondering whether he really wanted to beat Patrick or not, and absent-mindedly swung the club on autopilot, flicking the golf ball neatly up a ramp and into a sort of donut-shaped pit at the top. There it rolled around, one full lap, tipped over the rim, and landed perfectly in the tube below, which deposited it neatly in the hole at the foot of a fancy tree-shaped sign that was their finish line. Ned blinked. Oh, hooray! Barb knocked her ball off the edge of the ramp and it landed somewhere on one of the other parts of the course. Patrick made a shot almost, but not quite as good as Ned's, his ball landing just outside the hole on the bottom level. Finally, Betty stepped up, leaving her walking frame in Patrick's care. She wore a fierce, determined expression, her fangs peeking over her bottom lip as she slightly stuck out her tongue in concentration. She swung the golf club back, thwacked the ball with extreme force, and sent it sailing up into the air. The little group collectively held their breath as Betty's ball descended, skipped the ramp entirely, dropped through the center of the donut-shaped trough, and smack! Hit the tree-shaped sign with force, scattering the branches as it dropped into the hole at the base. They do say that vampires are very strong, remarked Patrick, as they all peered down at the destruction. But I must say, this is the first time I've seen one in action. It only seemed right that they should all play their part in reassembling the sign. Betty positioned her walking frame under the branch-like pieces that needed to be slotted back into place, while Patrick held on to the central pole. Ned hammered the sign's limbs back in with the butt of his golf club, and Barb stood back, giving advice on the symmetry. As Betty leaned forward to retrieve some laminated decorations that were supposed to be stuck onto the trunk, something swung forward out of the neck of her neatly buttoned vampire coat and dangled there, before them all, a lanyard on which hung her car and house keys. Oh, blast and damnation, she spat. I forgot about the lanyard you bought for me, Barb. I forgot about giving it to you, Betty, dear, Barb said. That's even worse. Not to worry, Patrick told them. Perhaps it's for the best. If you hadn't thought you'd lost your keys, we never would have had this afternoon of mini golf, after all. Ned looked at Betty as she smiled her fanged smile, then back at Patrick as he pulled his coat around him and collected the two ladies' golf clubs. Did you really spend all day with these two because Betty couldn't find her keys? He asked, as they made their way out of the golf course to where Chen was waiting by the ute, Ned's Klingon sword leaning against the cabin door beside her. Partly, replied Patrick with a wink, and partly as I wanted to see if I could be ordinary. Since Betty has decided I'm the alien to her vampire, she seemed like a suitable candidate to be ordinary with. Barb came out of the bathrooms attached to the kiosk at this juncture and looked from Chen and the sword to Patrick and back again, a faint glimmer of recognition in her eyes. Ned looked at Betty, grinning with her fangs, and Grease, who was giving the Klingon sword a worryingly good sniff. He looked at the mini golf course, arrayed behind them with its strange obstacles and minimal players. He replied, very ordinary. Time to go, Patrick smiled, winking. He strode over to Chen and surreptitiously took the permanent marker she was holding. He attempted to sign the sword with the pretense of patting Grease, which resulted in Grease ending up with the marker in his mouth and growling. Chen recovered it with difficulty and threw both sword and pen into the cabin. "Did you happen to record the final score?" she asked Patrick. "I heard it was unexpected." On the way back to the pub to collect her car, Betty decided to post some of her carry the paper crane pictures of the day to her Instagram story. She pulled out her phone and tapped on the app to see a new follower notification. She frowned at the screen. "Are you a knight, Patrick?" she asked, scrolling through the posts. "Your handle has Sir in it." Patrick seemed to concentrate on the road. "Oh yes, technically," he smiled. "Was that sword that Ned had something to do with you becoming a knight?" Barb inquired from the back seat. "Not really," Patrick answered. "Her Majesty the Queen unfortunately did not possess a Klingon sword." "Oh," said Betty. "Is your space thing a lot more important than my vampire thing then?" Patrick pulled into the parking spot next to Betty's car, and they all got out. "I wouldn't say that," he answered, unfolding Betty's walking frame. "No." "Do you like scones, Patrick?" Barb interjected, as though merely determined to insert herself into the conversation. "I do, yes, but sadly I have to fly back to Los Angeles tomorrow, so I probably can't join you for any." "Well," Betty told him, "I might listen to you reading things on Instagram sometimes, providing what you choose to read isn't a load of codswallop, of course." "Of course," replied Patrick. "I will endeavour to make sure my reading choices are up to standard." Later that evening, Betty finished off her post, tagging her young friend and Instagram rival, Fraser. "Carrie Crane. Busy day today, out trying great pub food and meeting new people. My human/vampire even beat a famous alien knight at golf at the Scots Port. Bet you can't do better than that." She put a picture of Patrick mid-golf swing with Carrie the paper crane in the foreground and a selfie of her grinning with fangs and holding Carrie out in front of their winning shot. She tagged Patrick's account too, and he liked the post. Betty even started a hashtag of "Vampires Beat Aliens" that sparked a great controversy in online circles. But Betty never did learn what a Klingon was, or that Patrick played a human and not an alien in space. She didn't go looking online for what he'd been knighted for, or try to find any of his shows, sci-fi or otherwise. She just watched him read the classics aloud on Instagram sometimes, when his selection wasn't codswallop, and tagged him occasionally when she happened to see something golf-related, since that was what they'd shared. Because sometimes it was just better to know somebody as ordinary.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, very good.
Great story.
I love it. And I know who it is.
Yeah, of course you do. Anyway, so I'm thinking that for next time, I want to cover a whole bunch of things that have been on the waiting list for quite a long time. So I'm just going to look at what we've got so far sitting on the waiting list. So we have navigating virtual environments, something I'm absolutely shocking at. People who get too many animals, parental intervention to convince children to do things or get themselves some time alone, keep the children, applying your sports etiquette to other situations where it isn't appropriate, the Birdman event in Darwin, which I don't know much about either. I need to look that up. When you realize you've gone to work wearing something very inappropriate, like the time I went to school in my Ugg boots. Mistaking cosmetic adornments for bugs. mystery or guerrilla gardening happenings, and mutual aversions, and the childlike people have none and want to touch the slimy thing and all that. So there's quite a lot there waiting to be put in a story. So I thought it'd be good to specifically, try and well, I'm happy to take a few, 2 or 3 extra things to add to that list, and then I'll take sort of whatever sort of 3/4 of it works together the best, I suppose.
Well, Barry had one today that got me going, because tell Sarah about the Stuart O'Grady one.
Oh yeah, I booked a ticket to go and listen to Stuart at the McLaren Vale Bowling Club.
Right.
When he was tour down under, and I forgot about it. It didn't turn up.
So you didn't go.
No, I didn't go. No.
Forgetting.
You forgot to go.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. You forget something that was, very significant at when you arrange it, you completely forget to do it.
Sarah, I had another one that it just occurred from something that happened lately. When you're showing somebody something and having a chat back to them, I don't know if this ever happened to other people, but that seems to happen to me a bit. And people interpret it as you're gifting them the thing.
Oh.
And you've got no way of backing out and going, well, actually, my grandmother gave me that.
Right, so let's see what the date for our next story is. It is scheduled for the 11th of February. So put 11th of Feb in your diaries and calendars for now. I will let you know that it's vaguely possible that we might be in the middle of moving house, which could make it difficult. But I did, when we moved here, if you remember, I did do some story times with my phone up in the window doing the hotspot to get internet. So, it can be done with very little, and Margaret and Mark have joined sometimes from their tent and thing, or from the camper van out and camping somewhere. So we'll see how it goes, but I should be able to do it. So 11th of Feb, same time. There's no daylight savings or anything like that happening yet, is there? It's not till April, I think.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, so same timing on 11th of Feb, and we're going to try and do lots of the stuff off the waiting list, plus a few. I could probably fit, one more thing if anyone's got anything really different or you really like in the next story. Well, yes, thank you very much. I will pop the recording off now. So I think let's say goodbye to everyone watching retrospectively on YouTube. Thanks for being with us.
That's lovely. Thanks ever so much, Sarah. Take care.
Bye. Bye.